Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Museum of Florida History. My name is Bill Maddox. I head the Center for American Ideals at the James Madison Institute here in Tallahassee. And tonight, I want you to know that you are a witness to history. Here on our stage tonight, we have two gentlemen who lived parallel lives. Benjamin Franklin, who we all know is a great American, a member of the founding fathers of our nation, who was born in the early 1700s and died in the late 1700s.
I beg your pardon, sir. Are you a seer?
No, I'm not a seer.
Well, you mentioned my death, and as you can see, I'm still quite alive, and I don't know of anyone that can tell the time of death of someone.
And if you can, I'd just as soon not know.
Joining Mr. Franklin on our stage is John Wesley, who was also born in the early 1700s, also died in the late 1700s, and championed many ideas that were very similar to the ideas that we associate with Benjamin Franklin here in this country. And so we're going to spend a few minutes talking with these gentlemen and learning some about some of the similarities in their lives as well as some of the differences. One of the things, apart from living very similar during a very similar time span on different sides of the pond, they each were born into large families. Child number 15 in each case, one in a family of 20, the other in a family of 17. Traveled a great deal for men of your time. You, Mr. Franklin, took trips to Europe on a couple of occasions, and I know Mr. Wesley made at least one trip here to the Americas and then returned, but then traveled a great deal around there. Tell us about some of your travels there in Europe, Mr. Wesley, and kind of what got you started going around preaching? Was this your great idea?
Well, as a matter of fact, no. I did come to Savannah and was with the Church of England and stayed a few years there, and was not a happy experience for me. I was happy to get back to my country of England. And when I got back there, I discovered that the churches were just for the rich people and so forth. And I had a very good friend who actually became a friend of Mr. Franklin's too. His name was George Whitfield. George and I went to college together. And you asked me did I travel a lot? Do you want to answer that one first, or do you want me to tell you about George? I'll tell you about traveling first. After I started to preach, because George was the one that got me preaching out in the open like that, I started on horseback and I traveled all over England, and I kept a diary every day, and people have studied where I've gone, where I preached and so forth, and they have calculated that up to today, up to this time, I have traveled over 250,000 miles on horseback. I had a wonderful chestnut horse that for most of that time, and I've had 3 horses, but one of them was a wonderful chestnut that I loved. 250,000 miles, and they calculated that I preached 42,000 sermons in that time.
And as I recall, you had like some pulpit that you would carry around so that you could stand tall among the people. Is that right?
Well, that came later in my life. At first I was just speaking in amphitheaters, but as I started to come to London and preach in factories and down at the docks and so forth, I had them build me a pulpit. It was about this high that had steps, and I would stand up here. Well, I'd have 4 sturdy lads would lift that up onto a wagon, and then I would take that to wherever I was going on any particular day, and then I could get up on the wagon, then I could get up on that, and I'd be very, very high because I'm not very tall, and then they could hear me all over the place. But I took that wagon, and that, as a matter of fact, that I don't think I've mentioned this to you before, but that pulpit is here in America. It's up to a place that I've never been. I've never seen it. It's a place called Junaluska up in Georgia here, and that pulpit, you can go up and see it at Lake Junaluska.
So now, Mr. Whitfield, you sent to America and told him to be sure to look up Mr. Franklin.
Well, let me tell you about Mr. Whitfield, and I will give you some time here in a minute, Mr. Franklin. I'm sorry to be taking so much time. I will hurry because I know our time is limited. Mr. Whitfield was a friend of mine from college. We grew up together, and he was my closest friend, except for my brother, Charles, probably. But But Mr. Whitfield, when I went back from Savannah to England, I was preaching in a few churches, and he said, I'd like you to come out and see me preach. I'm preaching in a field. And I said, George, you can't preach in a field. You need a church. You need a cross, and you need windows and so forth. Like, he said, well, come out and see me preach. So I went out, and he was preaching in a big field, kind of a gully like this, and he was up on the edge like this, and he was preaching to 3,000 people. I'd never preached to more than 500 people in my whole life, and I thought, wow. So I walked around and I listened, and the people were saying, amen, hallelujah, and things like that, and they were being touched by these sermons. And I thought, well, George, you may be right, this may be a good idea. And he said, well, good, because next Thursday you're going to preach. I have it set up, and I said, all right, I'll try. So I went out, and when I got there, there were 5,000 people. My very first time outside, I preached to 5,000 people. And they responded to me like they did to George. George was a flamboyant fellow. His voice could carry all over. And as you can see, I don't have a real deep, heavy voice. But it went well, and I liked it. And I said, George, I like this very much. And George said to me, well, it's good, because I've booked 15 between now and summertime. And they're all yours, because I'm getting on a boat to go to Philadelphia to see Mr. Franklin. And that's how I got started. And from then on, I never stopped. I preached the whole rest of up to current days. And as I say, 250,000 miles of preaching due to George Whitfield.
Huh. And Mr. Franklin, as I understand it, if your father had had his wish, you too would have been a preacher. Is that correct?
That is correct. I was to be my father's tithe to the church. I was the 10th son born. At the age of 5, he sent me to school, first to the Boston Greek School. Spent 2 years in school, preparing for Harvard, which would then prepare me to be a man of the cloth. Well, after but 2 years of schooling, my father determined that I did not have the temperament to be a man of the cloth. I understand that. But I was apprenticed to an older brother as a printer, and I think that has served me well. I still am proud of the fact that I am a printer and a publisher.
As I seem to recall, there was also, you were a prolific writer, but didn't always write in your own name. And there was even a time, as I recall, that you used a woman's name to cover for something that you had written. Can you tell us this story?
Well, I actually used a woman's name on more than one occasion, but I think what you're referring to is as I was apprenticed to my brother, a lad of 15, and I wrote a number of letters signed Silence Dogood, a middle-aged widowed woman of the environs of Boston town, pointing out the foibles and the misdeeds of the public, of the people of Boston. My brother, I had to hide my handwriting a bit, change it so that he would not recognize it. And at night, I would slip Mrs. Dogood's letters under the door of his office. In the morning, he and his friends would come in, find the letters, read them, and his friends actually talked him into publishing those letters. After some 8-10 letters, my pride got the better of me, and I informed my brother that it was I, his small brother, his younger brother, that wrote the letters. And I must say, I can still remember the beating that that he administered for playing such a trick on him.
Well, very good. Now you go on to write Poor Richard's Almanac, The Way to Wealth. Spent a lot of time talking about the wise use of money. Tell us how you first learned about good money management and the value of money.
Well, my first lesson in this, I was a lad of maybe 8 years old, and an older brother who had gone to sea returned home, made a present to each of us children of a few small coins. told us to go out and purchase whatever we wanted as a gift from him to us. So as a young lad, I grabbed my coins, go scampering out the door, trying to think of just what treasures I could buy. And shortly I hear music from coming around the corner. I followed my ear, and there was a lad sitting on a barrel, a little bit older lad, playing a tin whistle. I thought it was the most amazing thing. Here with this small piece of tin, he's making wonderful music. I offered up all my coins to purchase that whistle. He, of course, gladly made the exchange. I goes trotting back to the house, tooting on the whistle, making what I thought was grand music, go rushing into the house, parading around, blowing the whistle, thoroughly bothering and upsetting my brothers and sisters. I gladly told them of the purchase I made, thinking that they would congratulate me. They start laughing. And they chided me. And they let me know quite clearly that for a fraction of a small coin, I could have bought a new whistle and would have had money left over for other treasures. That is when I started to learn the value of money and the value of the goods that money can provide.
Now, Mr. Wesley, you also spent a lot of time talking about money. I seem to recall you had a famous sermon where you were able to kind of boil your philosophy of what you think, how you think people should use their money down to a few simple ideas. How about sharing those with us?
Well, that sermon lasted about an hour and a half, and I won't bore you with that today, but
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Franklin, we're friends. But quite simply, I really believed, and I got some of my ideas from Mr. Franklin. He was writing Poor Richard's Almanac at the time, and I got some of my ideas from him. And these little societies that I started, called Methodist societies, what I wanted those people to believe is they wanted to go out and help the poor people and so forth. So I wanted them to earn as much as they could, save as much as they could, give as much as they could to help the poor and so forth for as long as they possibly could. So those 4 points are what I just saved you an hour and a half sermon. I spent an hour and a half sermon on those.
So give all you can,
Well,
save all
earn
you
all,
can.
earn all you can. Earn all you
Earn
can.
all you
First.
can.
Earn it. Have to earn it first.
Earn all you can,
And save as
all
much
you
as you can. In other words, put it in. I had certain categories that you put money in. This is for saving. This is for giving to the poor. This is for paying rent and so forth like that. And then do it as long as you can for the rest of your life. Exactly.
Very good.
Don't be frivolous with your money.
Good sound financial advice. And as I seem to recall, when you were in Paris, you wanted to give the Parisians some sound money or sound financial advice because you saw them wasting a lot of money on energy costs, as we would think of it. Tell us this story, Mr. Franklin.
Well, while I was in Paris doing what small service I could for my country, many of the actual dealings of the French court would be conducted in the evening at dinners and other gatherings. And after a particularly late supper and dinner and meeting, I went back to my chambers and was awoken about early in the morning and totally amazed that there was a bright light coming around the edge of the window shade. So I opened up the shutters, and would you believe that the sun was up? Had been up for some time. The day was bright, filled my chamber with light, and I thought, if our dinners and meetings would conclude an hour earlier, and I started thinking, if we stopped an hour earlier, got up in the morning an hour earlier, how many candles could be saved? Now, in the city the size of Paris, I calculated how many candles would not be burned, and with the cost of candles at that time, 40 to 50,000 sous would be saved. And just think of what General Washington could do with that money for the Continental cause. So by getting up just a bit earlier, starting your day sooner, how much more can you do? As I said, early to bed, early to rise will make a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. And it was brought to my attention that there would be laggards that would not follow this advice. Well, that was easily remedied. You would have cannons set out on several corners of the streets. They would fire early, and after but a few days, these laggards would be happy to go to bed earlier so that they would be awoken before the cannon would wake them.
So basically, then you were the one to whom we should thank for daylight savings time, because that grew out of your study there and watching the
amount of money that could be saved. Yes.
All right. So speaking of cannons going off and of General Washington's army, Mr. Wesley, you had some really interesting observations about how the American Revolution, in an ironic way, because you're an Englishman, actually helped kind of advance your cause and your influence. Help us understand this.
Absolutely. It was the American Revolution that really made the Methodist Church. As I said, after I went back from Savannah, I went back to the churches of England, and they were for rich people and so forth. And I started these societies. They're really Bible studies, but a little bit more than that, because all of this society, I told them to earn money and to go out and help the poor and so forth. So I started all of these societies all over England within the Church of England. Over in America, the same thing was happening. We had several thousand churches of England, from Maine all the way down into Georgia. And they were the Church of England. Within those churches of England were all of my Methodist societies. Think about the preachers that were there. First of all, the name is Church of England. They were all educated in England. They went to seminary in England. They were loyal to the king. So when the Revolutionary War came on, you know where their loyalties lied? They lied, of course, with England. And so as the colonies started to win the war, the bishops over...
I beg you, sir, we did not start the war. King George started that war.
Okay, we agree to disagree, okay, Mr.
On that matter we shall.
All right. Anyway, as King George's war, they told them all to come back, and 95% of all of the clergy in the Church of England in America went back to England, or they went to Canada. Some in Maine and Massachusetts took those that were loyal to King George, and took them to Canada. So here were all these empty churches. My Methodist societies were going strong. The Americans loved they were even more stronger over here than they were in England. They loved it, but they didn't have anybody to marry them. They didn't have anybody to do communion for them. They had nobody to baptize their babies. And they said, we need preachers. So I went to the bishops of the Church of England, and I said, we need to take some young men who are willing to go over to America. And they were so angry at the colonists for starting that war, sorry, starting that war that, George, yes, I hear you, starting that war, that they would not send any clergy over here. And so what I did is I took two gentlemen, a gentleman by the name of Coke and a gentleman by the name of Asbury, and I made them bishops, and I sent them over here, and I said, I want you to start ordaining some young men in my societies that were leaders in the societies, so that they can marry and give communion and baptize babies. So they came over here, and all of the colonists in the Methodist societies thought this was wonderful. And they said, well, we want to start a church. And I said, no, it's Church of England, because I was still a minister in Church of England. And I said, no. They said, we are not going to be the Church of England. That's who we just fought a war with. We would like to be our own church. And I said, well, what would you like to be? And they said, well, we're Methodists. Let's be Methodists. And that's exactly how the Methodist Church started. If it hadn't been for the Revolutionary War, there would be no Methodist Church. And all of you who may be Methodist out there would be Church of England still today, I guess.
We are unfortunately out of time, and so I want, if you would, to have you join me in thanking these gentlemen for coming out and sharing with us a little about their life.